There are certain interviews that vanish almost as soon as they're recorded, fading like whispers into the wind. Some documents mysteriously disappear, witnesses suddenly go silent, and those who do remember choose not to speak, especially when the subject hovers at the blurry edge where science meets the unknown. It's as if an invisible force erases the trail, leaving behind only questions. Among the few names that have shaped modern understanding of the universe, Stephen Hawking stands out unmistakably. A brilliant physicist, a revolutionary thinker, and a man whose very life story defied the limitations of the human body. But more than that, he was someone who pushed the boundaries of what we thought we could know about space, about time, about reality itself. He spoke with authority about black holes, about the birth of the cosmos, and the nature of time itself. But there was one subject he almost never touched in public: the afterlife. Whether by choice or necessity, he seemed to steer clear of it, as though it were too controversial. Or perhaps too personal, that is, until a peculiar discovery was made. In the spring of 2025, a group of independent researchers began reviewing the digital archives of restricted university collections. Buried deep within the secure database of the University of Cambridge, they stumbled upon something entirely unexpected: a strange, unnamed audio file. Its title was nothing more than a chaotic string of letters and numbers. But hidden within the metadata was a phrase that sent chills down their spines: Hawking. Consciousness beyond. At first, the find was dismissed, a likely hoax. A prank file slipped into the system. But after careful acoustic analysis, experts confirmed something astonishing. The voice on the recording did, in fact, belong to Stephen Hawking. Even more surprising was the timestamp. The file had been recorded in the early 2000s, a period when Hawking was virtually unreachable and had almost completely withdrawn from giving interviews. And yet, here was a candid, unreleased conversation between Hawking and an unknown individual. The interviewer's voice had clearly been modified or distorted, making identification impossible. But what mattered more was what was said. The first 10 minutes of the recording were filled with familiar topics, questions about the beginning of time, the nature of gravity, theories of everything. But then came a single question that redirected the entire trajectory of the dialogue. "Professor," the interviewer asked, "if information in a black hole is never truly lost, could it be possible that consciousness, too, survives the death of the body?" A pause followed. The sound of Hawking's breath, soft, deliberate, was captured on tape. Then, calmly, he replied, "This is a question I have studied more than I have publicly admitted." What followed was a monologue that would have been deemed unthinkable by the standards of mainstream science. Hawking explained that if information cannot be destroyed, then this principle must extend beyond physical matter. It must also apply to cognitive patterns, memory, perception, and experience. What various religions refer to as the soul, he suggested, might not be a separate spiritual entity at all, but rather an information structure, a configuration governed by the same conservation laws that dictate the fate of energy and matter. The interviewer pressed further, seeking clarity. "Are you saying that consciousness can continue to exist?" Hawking's response was surprisingly firm. "In a certain form," he said, "but not in the way traditional religions describe it." He elaborated on a hypothesis he had been developing in private, one in which consciousness is not merely a function confined to the brain. Instead, it exists as quantum information, scattered across space and time, interwoven into the fabric of the universe. So what happens when the body dies? According to Hawking in this private exchange, the information doesn't vanish. It simply shifts into another state, another dimension of existence. Death, he said, is not an end, it is a transformation. These words stood in stark contrast to the statements he had made in public over the years, where he often claimed that death brings nothingness. But here, in this hidden audio, we hear a different side, one that suggests he may have entertained deeper, more mysterious possibilities behind closed doors. And this is where things begin to get even stranger. When the researchers continued analyzing the audio file, they noticed odd details that raised more questions than answers. Beneath the surface of the dialogue, there were faint, nearly imperceptible sounds, digital pulses, patterns resembling encrypted signals or hidden codes. Forensic audio experts speculated that the file had been deliberately modified or encrypted, perhaps to mask certain segments or embed secret data. However, despite the mysterious glitches and missing data, the most critical part of the conversation remained untouched, and what it revealed was nothing short of astonishing. In the recovered portion of the interview, Hawking continued in a steady tone. In recent years, I consulted with a small team of physicists and neurobiologists. Together, we worked on something we temporarily called the Cognitive Trace Program. Our objective was simple in theory, though far more complex in practice, to determine whether consciousness could leave behind measurable, detectable traces even after the death of the brain. This wasn't mere speculation. Hawking explained that they had used advanced neurointerfaces and laser spectroscopy technologies that, at least publicly, were only deployed for analyzing brain activity and studying memory retention. But behind closed doors, these tools were being used for something far more profound. According to Hawking, during the course of this research, something unexpected happened. In 2 of our trials, he said, we recorded phenomena that defied conventional explanation. Specifically, after the death of 2 subjects, sensors picked up sudden bursts of quantum activity within the lab. These events couldn't be accounted for by any known biological process or explained by the expected decay of brain tissue. They weren't normal. They were anomalous. The interviewer leaned in with a single question. Are you referring to something like a quantum echo? Yes, Hawking replied. It appeared to be exactly that. Memory, emotions, possibly even fragments of the individual's personality remained, not in a conscious or communicative form as we typically understand it, but as patterns, structures that persisted in the quantum field, capable, perhaps, of interacting with their environment. It was an idea reminiscent of the controversial theories proposed by Roger Penrose about quantum consciousness. Yet Hawking didn't stop there. He dared to push the concept further. He presented a hypothesis that bridged 2 seemingly distant phenomena, black holes and human consciousness. A black hole, he said, does not destroy information, it transforms it. And from this, he drew a bold parallel. Consciousness, too, does not vanish when the brain ceases to function. It undergoes a transformation. It changes its mode of existence. There was a long silence in the recording, the kind that carries weight heavier than words. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, the interviewer asked, "Is that what we call the soul?" Hawking's reply was almost inaudible, yet clear. If you strip away the religious layers, yes, it is an informational soul. It is not bound solely to the body. It exists as part of quantum reality. At that exact moment, strange sounds emerged in the recording. Distortions, static, and crackling noise as though something, or someone, was attempting to interfere with the audio. The timing was no coincidence. It felt like a signal, or maybe a warning. Undeterred, the research team who had discovered the file attempted to reconstruct the damaged fragments using spectral analysis. They were successful in partially recovering several segments. In those remaining minutes, Hawking revealed the deeper implications of what he and his colleagues had discovered. These conclusions, he said, were never meant for public consumption. They're too dangerous. If it's confirmed that consciousness leaves behind a cognitive trace after death, the consequences will be far-reaching. It would upend not only philosophy and science, but religion, governance, and the very structure of society. Some might use it to elevate humanity. Others would weaponize it for control. That, he concluded, is why he ultimately chose not to publish the findings. Perhaps, he added, humanity simply isn't ready. The file ended abruptly, with a sharp click, a cold, final sound that marked the end of the transmission. But in truth, that was only the beginning of the mystery. Because when the research team turned their attention to the metadata embedded in the audio file, they made another stunning discovery. Alongside the basic technical details was a string of encoded numbers. At first glance, they appeared to be meaningless, a random assortment of digits. But upon inputting the numbers into a geolocation system, a real-world destination appeared on the map, a laboratory complex located just outside of Geneva. This was no ordinary lab. It was linked to one of the world's most enigmatic scientific institutions, CERN. Officially, the facility was used for testing magnetic systems. But whispers from independent sources suggested something else. In the early 2000s, A closed group of scientists reportedly operated there under the leadership of a man named Dr. Mark Euler, a theoretical physicist known to have worked with Hawking in the past. The research team knew they had to dig deeper. They filed a series of formal requests to gain access to CERN's archived data. It took several months of navigating bureaucratic red tape, legal procedures, and confidentiality barriers. Eventually, partial access was granted to several declassified documents. Among the trove of files, the researchers discovered a set of internal reports marked with a title that mirrored Hawking's private revelations, Cognitive Echo Project. The documents were dated 2002 and 2003. One of the declassified reports from CERN's archives contained a sentence that would send a shiver down any scientist's spine. During experiment number 14, anomalous quantum radiation was recorded at the exact moment of the subject's clinical death. What made this discovery even more unnerving was what followed. The radiation continued for a full 4 minutes after both cardiac activity and brain function had officially ceased. This wasn't some ambiguous energy fluctuation or equipment glitch. Another document put the matter even more bluntly. It stated that the probability of spontaneous signal generation under controlled laboratory conditions is less than 1/1,000,000%. In plain terms, the chances that this was a random occurrence were virtually zero. And this was no longer just theoretical speculation. These findings directly corresponded with Hawking's private hypothesis, the one he had only dared to whisper about. The implications were staggering. Not only could consciousness leave a trace after death, but such traces might be measurable, even observable, under the right conditions. Suddenly, Hawking's interview wasn't just an intellectual exercise in metaphysics. It was something more, a breadcrumb trail pointing toward actual, documented phenomena. But this leads to a burning question. If all this really happened, why didn't the world know about it? Why wasn't it in the headlines? The answer was chilling in its simplicity. Dr. Mark Euler, the man who had led the mysterious Cognitive Echo Project and collaborated closely with Hawking, vanished in 2004. No one knew where he had gone. His communications ceased. His name disappeared from official reports. And within months, the rest of the research team was scattered. Some were dismissed quietly. Others were reassigned to unrelated projects. The Cognitive Echo Project was erased from all subsequent CERN records. It was as if it had never existed. But the cover-up didn't stop there. After the Hawking audio surfaced, members of the team analyzing it began receiving anonymous warnings. Some messages were subtle, suggestions to stop the investigation for their own safety. Others were more direct. One audio forensics expert, after weeks of silent tension, abruptly quit the project and left the country without explanation. Still, not everyone backed down. A portion of the team remained determined. They believed that what Hawking had left behind wasn't just scientific gold, it was a key. A message not meant to be buried. And their persistence paid off. While scanning the original audio file more deeply, the team uncovered something no one had expected, a hidden digital signature. It was embedded subtly, masked behind audio frequencies that could only be revealed using layered decryption techniques. The message was brief, only 7 words, but profound. Consciousness is not a function. It is a path. Those 7 words changed everything. This wasn't merely an expression of belief. It was a directive, a philosophical compass embedded within data. It implied that Hawking hadn't simply theorized a phenomenon. He was pointing toward a process, a journey, that consciousness continues even after the body ceases to function. Dr. Louis Harding, one of the remaining researchers and a noted expert in quantum informatics, proposed a radical interpretation. Building on Hawking's theory, Harding suggested that if consciousness truly is an informational structure, not a localized brain function, but something more, then it could migrate into what he called a quantum memory field. This hypothetical realm would be a kind of informational dimension, a place where cognitive patterns, emotions, and elements of personal identity persist not as matter or energy in the traditional sense, but as waveforms. Not only could these patterns survive, they might also interact, perhaps even evolve. Harding referenced not only Roger Penrose's ideas, but also the early work of physicist John Wheeler, the man who once proposed that the universe itself might be capable of retaining and reflecting information, like a cosmic memory. If this was true, then the implications were mind-bending. Consciousness might not simply persist, it could reincarnate. But what if this wasn't just theory? The team decided to dig further. If such a field existed, and if fragments of memory and identity could continue beyond death, might there be real-world evidence? Their search led them across the ocean to the University of Virginia, to a little-known but long-running program at the Division of Perceptual Studies. For over 50 years, this department had been compiling accounts of children who remembered past lives, cases often dismissed as imagination, coincidence, or fabrication. But when the researchers began cross-referencing these accounts with data recovered from the Cognitive Echo Project, something incredible happened. In 13 separate cases, children had described people, events, and places that had direct links to individuals involved in the Echo Project and related research. These were not vague memories, they were detailed, verifiable descriptions of lives and environments that no child should have known anything about. Coincidence? Imagination? Or was it something else entirely? As the evidence mounted, the team realized they were standing at the threshold of a truth that had long been buried, perhaps deliberately. A truth that could change not only how we understand death, but how we understand ourselves. And now, with this fragile trail of breadcrumbs leading back to both Hawking's hidden audio and secret experiments across continents. Take, for instance, the case of a 6-year-old boy from Texas. He came from a completely ordinary family, no scientific background, no ties to Europe, no reason at all to know anything about high-level physics. And yet, during a routine conversation, the boy described in startling detail a series of experiments involving magnetic traps, technology used at the Geneva laboratory connected to CERN. He described the layout, the purpose, even terminology that had never been released to the public. Then there was the girl from California, barely 8 years old, who could recite complex strings of numbers. Upon investigation, researchers discovered that these exact number sequences matched encrypted test codes used during the Cognitive Echo Project, codes that had been buried in sealed documents for over 2 decades. Could these be coincidences? Dr. Louis Harding didn't think so. Neither did his team. The volume and precision of these accounts, across distance, across cultures, across time, could no longer be dismissed as random anomalies or flights of childhood imagination. Harding put forward a theory that was both daring and strangely elegant. If consciousness is truly an informational structure, as Hawking had suggested, then after the biological host dies, that structure doesn't necessarily vanish. It lingers, drifting like a signal, and sometimes it resonates with new carriers. Children, whose brains are still forming, whose neural networks are flexible and unconstrained by rigid patterns, may be particularly susceptible to receiving these traces. This idea explained not just isolated memories, but the broader phenomena of so-called returned souls. These weren't cases of reincarnation in the religious sense. They were reactivations, echoes of consciousness reattaching themselves to compatible vessels. But this breakthrough raised a far more unsettling question. Why do some consciousnesses return, while others fade into silence? Once again, the answer lay hidden within the shadows of Hawking's mysterious recording. A segment long thought corrupted was partially restored through enhanced filtering and digital forensics. What they recovered was brief, but profound. Not all patterns are compatible. Only those that carry development continue. The others are erased. It was a chilling idea. A kind of natural selection, not of biology, but of consciousness itself. Hawking was no longer just acknowledging the existence of the soul. He was proposing a framework in which the rebirth of consciousness follows the same evolutionary logic as genetics. Only those mental structures that show growth, progression, or adaptability are carried forward. The rest are deleted. This was nothing less than a scientific theory of reincarnation, stripped of mysticism but rich in cosmic consequence. When Harding's group published their initial findings, the scientific community responded quickly, and with controversy. A wave of criticism swept through elite institutions. Spokespeople from both the University of Cambridge and CERN declared that such hypotheses fell outside the realm of verifiable science. Some physicists accused Harding's team of indulging in dangerous pseudoscience. Psychologists called it reckless, fantastical. Yet amid the backlash, voices of support emerged. One of the most prominent came from Professor Karen Blake, a leading neurophysiologist from Princeton. In a public statement, she said, Modern science is too afraid of questions that threaten its cherished assumptions. But if we keep ignoring the phenomena that don't fit into our existing models, we're not preserving truth, we're stunting our evolution. While the academic world debated, Harding's team pressed on. They followed a new lead buried deep in CERN's lesser classified files. One report stood out, labeled with a classification code, Class C. It was the lowest level of secrecy, so gaining access proved relatively easy. The document described an obscure experiment conducted in 2002 involving a group of individuals with unusual cognitive traits. These weren't just savants or hyper-intelligent minds. These were people who, unprompted, began recalling memories and experiences from lives they had never lived. People who described emotions and events that had no connection to their personal history. One line in the document caught everyone's attention. A group of carriers of cognitive patterns with signs of memory transfer. The probability of random coincidence, less than 1/1,000,000th. But the most staggering detail lay in a quiet reference tucked near the end of the report, the chosen eight. That phrase struck a nerve. It echoed something from Hawking's encrypted audio file, consciousness as a path. Only compatible patterns continue. Was it possible that this was more than a metaphor? Could Hawking have been referring to a specific group, an actual set of individuals whose consciousnesses were not only preserved, but intentionally guided for some future purpose? The idea seemed fantastical, almost mythic, and yet, the growing body of evidence, spread across labs, across countries, across generations, made it harder and harder to ignore. But just when it seemed like the mystery might begin to unravel, something unexpected happened, a sequence of events that would take the investigation into dangerous new territory, forcing even the skeptics to reconsider everything they thought they knew about life, death, and what lies beyond. And so, the question loomed larger than ever. Who were the chosen eight? And what were they meant to become? Over the course of the next 2 years, something remarkable began to unfold. Harding's team, now operating as a decentralized global network of researchers and collaborators, observed a growing number of reincarnation memory cases emerging among children across the world. But this wasn't happening randomly. The pattern was unmistakable. A significant concentration of these cases appeared in developed nations, particularly the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Japan. In these countries, children were not only recalling vivid memories of past lives, they were also exhibiting extraordinary talents in areas far beyond their age. Complex mathematical reasoning, mastery of musical instruments, fluency in foreign languages, a natural grasp of engineering concepts that even baffled professionals. But there was something else, something even more curious. Several of these children, when asked about their feelings or dreams, spoke about vague missions they had to complete. They couldn't describe exactly what the mission was, or who gave it to them, but they felt it, deep in their bones, as if a hidden part of them carried instructions that had not yet been decoded. Dr. Harding, seeking clarity, reached out once more to the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. Together, they launched a collaborative investigation. What they found only deepened the mystery. An overwhelming number of the children in question had been born during moments of profound societal or technological change. Times of disruption, times of transformation. It was exactly as Hawking had suggested in the hidden audio. The return of consciousnesses was not a chaotic phenomenon, it was guided, evolutionary, purposeful, and the discoveries didn't stop there. As Harding's team continued to gather data, more patterns emerged. Children with past life memories often clustered around regions undergoing cultural or scientific upheaval. These weren't just children with stories. Many of them demonstrated abilities that placed them far beyond their peers, almost as if they had arrived ready, prepared to influence or shape the unfolding changes around them. Some of the most gifted displayed unusual sensitivity to sound, pattern recognition, or abstract thinking. Others gravitated instinctively toward building, problem solving, or even speculative physics. It was as though their consciousness had brought something back, some echo of knowledge acquired elsewhere, some blueprint waiting to be fulfilled. Once again, the same haunting phrase surfaced. They spoke of tasks, of missions, but could not say what they were. By now, Harding and his colleagues were convinced these consciousnesses had not returned by chance. They were selected. The term, compatible consciousnesses, began appearing more frequently in their reports, describing individuals whose minds could resonate with quantum remnants from a previous existence. These were souls, if you will, that had returned to complete something, or perhaps to guide humanity toward a necessary future. But the story took another unexpected turn. One day, Harding received an anonymous, encrypted message. It contained a single, cryptic line. Hawking knew more than you think. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Attached to the message was a digital file. Its title: Protocol of the Evolution of Consciousness. Inside the file was a document, complex, dense, yet profoundly illuminating. It outlined a theory developed by Hawking in collaboration with a discrete group of physicists, neurobiologists, and philosophers. The document proposed that consciousness is not merely the result of brain activity. It is one of the foundational structures of reality. It stated that both black holes and consciousness obey the same laws of information preservation. The soul, it claimed, is an informational pattern, a structure that evolves through cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Only those consciousnesses that contribute to development of self, of others, of collective awareness, continue. The rest simply dissolve. And during periods of global or civilizational crisis, these compatible consciousnesses return, not to dominate or save, but to nudge humanity forward, to help it evolve, one individual at a time. At the end of the document, there was a signature, Stephen Hawking, followed by one final sentence. The fear of death is the fear of losing form. But information does not disappear. We do not die. We transform. It was a breathtaking conclusion. And it changed everything. The spontaneous memories, the inexplicable talents, the emergence of extraordinary individuals at turning points in history. All of it suddenly made sense within this new paradigm. But there was also a shadow side, an undercurrent of risk. Harding understood that this knowledge, if misused, could be weaponized. Imagine governments or corporations trying to identify, exploit, or even manipulate returning consciousnesses. The potential for control, surveillance, or selective breeding was terrifying. And so, after intense deliberation, Harding's team made a bold choice. They released their findings to the public. Their research, once hidden in encrypted folders and sealed archives, became open source, and the world reacted. There was a media storm, philosophical debates, religious institutions issued statements, governments remained silent, but among the general public, the response was visceral. Millions of people began questioning everything, memories they couldn't explain, dreams that felt too real, déjà vu that now seemed like a glimpse through time. For some, it offered comfort, for others, unease, but for nearly everyone, it opened a door, a new way of thinking about life, about death, about the soul, not as a myth or superstition, but as a real, evolving pattern of information, a journey through space, time, and form. And just as Hawking had predicted, this was only the beginning. If this story made you pause, made you reflect, then stay with us. Support our work with a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, because what lies ahead isn't just another theory. It's the unfolding of a truth older than science, deeper than belief. The story of the soul is the story of all humanity, and it continues.